And the reason social media is bad is because for all the reasons we know, it creates like these false senses of like what everybody else is doing, everyone else is living their best life. And it's particularly damaging to adolescent and pre-adolescent girls.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey, Maria, good to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me back. It's great to do this in person.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, we did this about 1.5 years ago online. It was a different world. I was just kind of curious, Maria. So obviously, things have changed since then. There was also the acquisition by Singapore Press Holdings. So, a lot has happened. There was also the new US elections as well. And of course, we see the whole AI also happened between then and now as well, in terms of generative AI, large language models, and short video. So a lot has changed actually, and I just want to kind of get that update from you. So, first of all, I just want to ask you that you said that one thing, which is you're starting to loosen up your strategy for paywall. So what's going on in tech in Asia?
I mean, I think a few things. So one of the big things that have shifted is just honestly like tech winter, right? Like we're still in it. And I think the startup scene in Southeast Asia is dramatically different. We launched our paywall at the end of 2018, like September 2018. And we still fundamentally believe that subscription is in place for premium content because like that's where we dedicate the most amount of like resource and editing time. I mean, it takes I don't really know, but like hours and like 20, 30, 40 hours to write a single premium content article. And it's what YC always says, right? Like build a product that people want. And if you build something that's really valuable, then they're willing to pay for it. And so I think we still do believe in that. With that said, I do think obviously between tech winter, startups are a little bit less hot. Southeast Asia sadly has fallen a bit out of favor as well, I think on a global level as well. And then the rise of AI. And so I think there are all these like macro forces where to us, it's also important to make sure that our community stays relatively well informed, that we're not being like too standoffish with the paywall. And so we're looking for ways to kind of loosen up the paywall so that we can still create revenue out of what we think are the most important pieces, which is our premium content pieces. But to the extent that there's information that we could just be distributing to the community without having to worry about the economics and the commercials behind it, then we want to do that too.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because there's so many different factors that have impacted the business from a macro perspective, right? Which is tech winter, Southeast Asia winter,
Yeah.
and then AI, and then of course the acquisition. So there's a lot to unpack for those different pieces.
Where do you
want to start? How do you think about it? Which one is the most important to you out of those, let's say, 4 factors, and how it's impacted tech in Asia versus which is the least important from your perspective? Yeah.
That's a good question. I think they all have differing factors, right? So I would probably lump together the tech in Southeast Asia winter into one thing. It's obviously a headwind for us, but we believe it's cyclical. And so from that perspective, it's like, it sucks, but like you got to heads down, grind it out, like stay smart, stay aware, stay sensitive to what the market is saying and doing, but also maybe not sweat it too much on that one. So, and just and do a few product tweaks in order to manage that. I think on the AI front, that's something that actually we're quite excited about. In some ways, it could be the scariest of them all, but I think in other ways, it's also the biggest opportunity. And so, there are very few moments I feel like in someone's life, and it's actually really weird that COVID was one and now AI is another, where like the entire world is kind of going through something together.
Right.
And so AI is one of those things where we're just excited about it. We don't really, nobody knows what it means, but it's actually kind of fun to be able to sit together, think about what does AI mean? I mean, sure, for me as an individual, but actually for us as a media business in particular, and we can get into a little bit more details, and then really kind of rethink about okay, what value are we adding to the community? What role do we have to play in the world of AI when everyone's just, you can chat GPT or Perplexity and answer or whatever, and how do we continue to deliver to our core mission, which is still to build and serve Asia's tech and startup community. And then to be honest, the SPH acquisition, it hasn't really affected that much on internal operations, which is great. And so Yeah, and so we continue to run. The main thing is we actually just moved into the SPH headquarters in January, like 2 months ago. So like it's coming in small ways, but I think day-to-day tech in Asia hasn't made a huge impact.
Yeah.
And that's partially by design, right? Like
Yeah.
to credit, they said that they never wanted to change TIA. They just wanted to like integrate. And so like I actually think that they've definitely held true to their promise. And I very much appreciate that. Yeah.
So let's talk about acquisition, because when it happened, I think people were very happy because, this is a space that has obviously been difficult to see acquisitions in.
Yep.
I think that's one side. So I think it's like kind of like a little milestone
Yeah.
and a well-deserved one. What has that overall experience been? Because it's about a year and a quarter, right?
Yeah.
So how has that been for you all?
It's been a learning process.
Yeah.
So I've worked in corporates before, Apple and Deloitte previously. So I have some sense of how corporates work, but I've never worked in a Singaporean corporate. And then Willis, our CEO and founder, has never worked in corporates. So mixed experiences. So I do think that corporates work at a certain pace.
Yeah.
A lot slower. They are much more risk averse,
Right.
obviously. They have many more policies. And so for us, it's actually been, we're trying to pick and choose, like as if it's a menu. We're trying to pick and choose the parts of the SPH parts that we want to opt into and the parts that we want to opt out of. So actually from a business perspective, there's a lot of great opportunities with SPH because we can cross-sell, we can cross-collaborate, we can partner on a bunch of things. And so there is demand in the market for that. So actually from the commercial standpoint, the SPH acquisition has been great. From the employee perspective, we've opted to keep our own HR policies because we think we're friendlier, more flexible than what SPH offers. And so, yeah, so I think we're being extremely selfish right now, just being like, okay, here's where we want to opt in, here's where we want to opt out. And then for me personally, there's a bit more reporting requirements. Like I get pings from like HR versus finance versus, and they're like, can you fill in this sheet? And so it's also about a matter of prioritization. And so I think one thing that we've been really clear about from the beginning since we announced the acquisition, we want to maintain our core culture in terms of the pace we work at, how we think about things, the experimental mindset, the very startup-y hustle type of thing. So we're very protective of that bit. And even when it comes to my work, I'm always going to prioritize things that I think will fundamentally move the TIA business forward versus things that's kind of like a CYA thing that is requested on behalf of SPH.
For those who don't know, CYA probably means cover your ass.
Nelly means cover your ass. We need to report this to cover our ass in case anybody asks for blah, blah, blah. And so I'm just like, that's nice, but that's not the job, That's like fluff around the job. And so it's always like, let's just stay really, work focused.
Yeah, totally right. And so for those who are thinking about acquisitions, it's quite a rare phenomenon in Southeast Asia so far.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So do you have any advice for people who are considering an acquisition? Any advice you'll give for them?
Yeah, of course. Wow. So many. I have lots of thoughts on like the actual acquisition process and things I think we could have done better. Because it was my first time kind of guiding an acquisition. So there was just a lot in the actual negotiation process and the closing process that I've never gone through before. And I think we made out okay, but I do think that if this happens again, or what the advice I would give, like there's some really specific things that I think founders in the startup side needs to be a lot sharper about. But I would say it's also expectation management, to be honest. The reality is that like when you're in the negotiation process for the acquisition, everything is rosy, right? Like you're both like, wow, like look at this amazing market opportunity. If we only join forces, we can go capture that. And then the worst case scenario, you've heard about the acquisitions that have gone wrong, like the teams don't get along together. And then within 3 to 5 years or whatever, there's like a management buyout or they shut down, right? I think probably the reality is always going to be somewhere in between. And so being able to level set your expectations in terms of like, and you need to be able to think, okay, and to run all the permutations before you sign the SPA, right? It's like, okay, what do I want out of this for my company? Best and worst case scenario. What do I want out of this for myself? Best and worst case scenario, and just like really kind of play out all the possible ways that it could end up. And I think as long as you go into that with that sort of mental framework, you'll be able to handle things a lot better, right? So like what I'll say is fundamentally, I still think the acquisition was great for us, the right thing to do for the company. But truthfully, there were certain initiatives that I thought would get off the ground a lot faster. Still no line of sight on that, no visibility as to when it might happen. So things have just moved, things have played out a little bit differently than my ideal scenario, but better than my worst case scenario. And so I'm okay, right? But I think if you were just pegging it on the best case scenario, you would be really disappointed.
Yeah.
And so, the quote from Arthur Brooks that we kind of mentioned earlier was expectations minus reality is happiness. And so it's a bit like you can hope, but maybe keep your own expectations a little bit lower just so that you're not disappointed and you feel like, and I think that's been great for me. Yeah. And I'm still just focusing on what brings me happiness, which is I love working with our team. I love working with our community and our users. I love the events that we do. And so it's like just focus on those things as opposed to sweating too much the like, some of these like big dreams that we had that maybe are moving a little bit more slowly than I would otherwise like to see.
And I think what's interesting is that, we're both COOs, right? So you're a COO and
Yeah.
I'm a COO. I'm just kind of curious, like, have there been any reflections that you have about, being a COO over the past 2 years, about your way of work or what you need to do to become, I guess, more productive as COO?
Yeah. The COO role is always so funny to me because it means a slightly different thing at every company. I feel like because the COO generally is the second command to the CEO, but the CEOs are all very different. So depending on what the CEOs like to do, the COOs tend to be like to fill in the negative space around that.
Yeah.
So I was talking to a fintech CEO the other day, and then she was like, my job is all about managing risks, right? I'm like, what do you mean? And she's just like, I have to make sure that like we're in compliance. It's like a very regulatory heavy kind of thing. And I was just like, wow, that is so different than my job. So my job as COO, I'm very much like a commercial CEO and then finance and operations. So yeah, so like I run the sales team and a lot of our commercial stuff, events, of course, HR and finance. And so that has it shifted. I think it's shifted in the sense that like because of some of the market pressures we're seeing because of the tech and startup winter and Southeast Asia winter is, like we just have to be a lot more nimble and it's just a constantly evolving process. And so I feel like you just have to be out on the forefront all the time and like you're constantly improving. And, I would argue that we're crushing it on product market fit on a few different products a few years ago. And actually on a few of those products, I actually think that we've lost a bit of that PMF. And so we're refining it again. Yeah. And it's just constantly experimental. But your CEO role?
And biotech is,
Yeah.
I would say more on the finance, HR, investor relations. So I think definitely a strong CFO component, I would say so, but also very strong troubleshooting and global expansion piece as well. It's interesting as well. But like you said, it's not an easy piece. And I think a lot of struggle because, it's really about having that chemistry and compatibility work, right? Any reflections? I mean, you've been working with him for so many years now.
On Willis. Willis and I have like an amazing working relationship. Super hot-headed. Actually, we just did our last monthly town hall. One of the anonymous questions that came in was like, how do we diffuse Maria and Willis when they get really fired up? I think personality and temperament-wise, we're really similar. And I'm a very honest and transparent person. Like, you will always know how I feel about something, partially because I can't hide it for shit. But Willis is like next level communicator, right? He's so transparent, and that makes it really easy to work with him because you always know what he's thinking. And so I think for that foundation of like super tight comms has been the best thing. It just means that like, even if I disagree with him or like whatever he's doing, like there's no misunderstanding in terms of like what he's doing and why. And I think same thing on my side. And, and we also respectfully will say sometimes we just agree to disagree, but one person needs to make the decision. And so here's what we're going to do. And I just feel like that eliminates a lot of those like lingering conflicts or lingering tensions that could eventually take down a working relationship, right? Because you just have years of like these like, I don't know, pent up resentment or tension or whatever it is. And we just, we never give that room to start. And and as a result, I think it's been easy to work with him.
That's amazing. And I think what's interesting is that, it feels like that relationship is so key because like you said, it's such a tumultuous set of dynamics. I mean, showing up as product market fit, showing up as AI, showing as being part of a broader mothership as well. So how does that translate, I guess, from that nucleus of, the two of you working together through your team, I guess, interfacing all these changes?
I mean, I think because of the comms between us and because we're very aligned vision-wise, it's easy for us to deliver a cohesive message to the team, right? And so I think that's first things first, because obviously nothing creates chaos more than people saying different things, right? So like internally, especially like, what's the vision of the company? Where are we going? How do we feel about the acquisition? Like nothing creates chaos more than just if you're delivering two different messages. So I think that's really critical, is that we're always kind of speaking with like one voice, and you can always tell when something's like a little bit more Willis versus a little bit more Maria, but like big picture wise, we're driving to the same direction, and that helps the team really get on board. And then everything else is honestly just like a divide and conquer strategy. So on critical decisions, obviously one of us takes the lead, but then we cross-check with the other ones, and then we just kind of divvy up. Because I do finance and operations and HR a lot more, I have to interface with SP a lot more on some of these like necessary and required reporting things. And like 2 weeks ago at our one-on-one, he was like, hey, are you okay? Because you had seemed to interface with them all the time. He's like, are you okay? Like, is that, like, is that stressing you out? And like, so it's also just open acknowledgement. And I'm like, yeah, sure. It's maybe not my favorite part of the job, all this reporting stuff, but I get it. It's necessary. And, these are certain things that you just like soldier on through.
Yeah.
So I think, being able to like the clear comms for the team, the clear decision maker on any one given topic or project. And so it was really helpful as well. And then just like constantly checking in with each other.
Yeah, amazing.
It's not magic, right? It's just like a lot of hard work and long Slack messages.
The legendary Slack message.
And of course, very regular one-on-one.
Communications. And I think one of the tricky parts is obviously, communications is hard at the, executive level, and it's also easy, right? Because at that level, everyone's an adult.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to do a rookie mistake in communicating.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be quite difficult because the topics can be quite complex, right? I mean, the ones that you're already given are quite complex already, right? There's AI, there's product market fit, there's commercialization. There's all kinds of different things that you got to do. Is there any advice that you give people, who are new to a COO job or a C-suite job about how to communicate at a, like C-suite level?
Yeah. I think this is all going to sound really basic, but you do see it go wrong on like a day-to-day basis. But first things first is I think you have to define the fundamental objective and goal that you're trying to reach, right? Because I think if you don't put that down on paper, this could be as simple as like, okay, we're hiring for this new role. What's our ideal candidate for the role, or what do we think that role looks like? You might be head of sales or events director, something that sounds pretty obvious, but then what you might define as a successful candidate is slightly different than what I define. And so being able to write down these things, or when we think about how we want to adapt TIA in the age of AI, we have to define what our goal for this project, for this entire brainstorming session or initiative is, in order to then, I think that definition of the goal and objective up front is critically important, because otherwise you have people solving several different permutations of a similar problem, but not the exact same problem. So goal definition and objective up front for sure. And then I think being very clear about the ground rules, like how are you going to evaluate, what's the decision-making process, definitely, of course, like giving airtime to everybody who has an opinion about it. And then at the end of the process, like no matter how you're running it, but then also like the conclusion, and then also maybe the agreeing to disagree part, but still being able to move forward, right? So if you're doing a brainstorm and your idea wasn't picked and you really hate the idea that was picked, there still needs to be a point where you're going to say, okay, I disagree. I've expressed my reasons why, but because this is what the broader team wants, and these are the rules of the playing field, I'm going to still commit wholeheartedly to that. And because it's all about like what's best for the overall company as opposed to what's best for a particular individual or team. And I think that's where just a lot of miscomm ends up happening, right? Because people will feel like, I don't know, it's like a race, and and everyone at the C-level tends to be a bit competitive anyway. So it's like, oh, if you pick, it's like, it feels like a zero-sum game where it's, if your idea got picked but my idea didn't get picked, you're going to get the next promotion, or you get the shine and the glory, whereas I don't. And so you have to be able to remove a lot of these like more human feelings that I think don't go spoken, because sometimes people feel like they're being petty, like, or they just don't want to express it because they're also embarrassed about feeling it, but they still feel it. And so it's just being able to remove, I think, a lot of these things and not ignore them, but just like air them out, put them out. Direct sunlight kills a lot of germs, and so just like sanitize it as such.
Yeah. And I think when we think about all these communication norms, you've been doing all of these communications. I'm just kind of curious, like, how have the conversations internally been about AI, for example? So you said it's both an opportunity as well as something that's dangerous as well. So I'm just kind of curious how you think about it, because from the face of it is, today, if I want to find out what is the fundraising status of something, maybe I've in the past gone to Tech in Asia, or may use Google for it, but now I can use Perplexity or the new Google AI search, and then it spits out the answer on row one, right? I never click into the link or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious how the internal conversations are about this change here.
For sure. So, okay, full disclosure, AI is a project that's led by Willis, but obviously I've been part of the overall process. But, fundamentally, when ChatGPT had its like wow moment, was it November 2023?
Around
Right?
there.
Yeah. Okay. I think we immediately knew that was going to affect a content business and a media business like ours. So, what you've seen over the last year is multiple iterations of different AI products. So we first tried news by AI, then like fully AI written stories, then edited by humans, of course. So we're trying AI in all sorts of different iterations within the company. But I think fundamentally what we have to ask ourselves is, in the age of AI, assuming that Perplexity, ChatGemini, whatever, all get stronger and better, what fundamental role does TIA play? Or does any company like TIA play? And so that was our overarching goal and objective. It wasn't to say like, how do we adapt our newsroom to AI? Or how do we use AI? You know what I'm saying? So like, I think that problem definition was really critical, which is simply, and so that allowed us to go even broader. Right now, our main businesses are either on the editorial front or our events front. And so it allowed us to go broader, where we're thinking like, as a company, how do we define our own value and continue to find product market fit and customers in an AI age? So then we kicked off a lot of different experiments and MVPs in order to kind of test some of our ideas against it. We've convened like a brain trust, if you will, across the company, across multiple functions to really kind of think about this. And so we're pulling in the responses. And where we've ultimately landed is that fundamentally, I think proprietary data, and this isn't unique to Tech in Asia, but proprietary data sources are clearly becoming really, really important. And so we still believe that we're sitting on like a gold mine of proprietary data when it comes to Asia's tech and startup community. And so that's something that we're definitely holding on to. And we're developing products against that allows us to continue to inform and connect and support our community in a way that GPT or Perplexity wouldn't be able to, right? Competing to rewrite the same press release that gets sent around, because there's no sense in even wasting resources on that. But would be to like, okay, on the journalist front, be like, okay, scoops are still fundamentally human driven, right? Like that's still a WhatsApp or an email, somebody writing in to tell you. So like we're reorienting ourselves to do what humans do best, of course, in the media context. And then specifically events, we're also thinking about like, okay, events is, it's because you want that connection. So far, agents are not good enough in order to network on your behalf. And so, leaning into the event side, the more human side as well, but then also figuring out how to use AI to turbocharge the networking and the connections that we are able to deliver at our events. Yeah.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense, because I said, which is not just about augmenting the newsroom with AI, but also seeing what is the fundamental role of news in the world of AI, right? Because I'm just kind of curious, what do you think about that? What's the fundamental role of, I would say, Tech in Asia, or is it the fundamental role of news agencies? How would you,
It's slightly different, in my opinion. I don't think we are so wedded to our newsroom, to be honest. Like, it's been one of the best ways for us to connect, deliver information, like put Southeast Asia's tech and startup community on the map. Like, it's been a great way for us to add value. But if you say in the AI world that Perplexity or ChatGPT or whatever, any of these LLMs can deliver information better, then we're like, okay, that's cool. But again, our mission is to build and serve Asia's tech and startup community. So then we go back to the drawing board and we're like, okay, then how do we add value there?
Right.
And that's where, we're lucky that we have a great events business as well. So that's where we're like, okay, maybe we lean into this. So, I mean, the jury's out. Like, we haven't fully decided, to be honest, but we do have a few working hypotheses as to how we can continue to add value in the AI world. And some of them get pretty far away from our newsroom, because we're just like, that's not something we want to compete in. Now, for a newsroom who identifies and like, I want to stay a newsroom, I think that's, that is a tougher question. I mean, again, you have to go back to a proprietary data set. Like, what are you doing? And then similarly, like, LLMs, AI can only write based off of whatever the input is. So you still need the input somehow. And so I don't know what that looks like. It's like, would that be, I can tell you that, we receive a ton of press releases. Like, if you just like had some sort of automated process where like all press releases went into ChatGPT and then ChatGPT was like crunching the information and spitting it back out, I think the quality of information will eventually degrade, right? It would be a really good, it could create a really good like Wikipedia objective, like put together the information, but I think the insights wouldn't be there necessarily. So I think there is a role for newsrooms to play in the AI world, but whether or not there's a need, I think you would have to be ultimately really niche, like hyper localized, which I think you're starting to see in some of the US. In the US, like there's some really hyper local state content, deeply insights driven you're tapping into expertise that AI otherwise wouldn't have. And then again, maybe like scoops driven. I don't know. It's my working hypothesis.
Actually, I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, I agree about scoops, expert-driven, hyper-localization, proprietary data. Those are the only ways that
Yeah.
the AI can't do because they can outperform on the synthesis side, right? I think scoops is also quite an interesting dynamic because, to some extent, we acknowledge the Southeast Asia tech scene has some level of opacity to it, right? I think it's more transparent compared to where it was 10 years ago, thanks to
Yes.
tech in Asia. But there's definitely still a lot of random nonsense happening.
Yeah.
I mean, opacity could be positive, in which case a company just has a certain proprietary advantage that they want to do and keep, which makes sense. And then also all the way to fraud, right? And scandals. I think recently we had e-fishery as a scandal.
Yeah.
We had as another one. So I think there's different dynamics there. I think you guys also scooped on octopus as well. So I thought it was interesting to see that dynamic. I do feel like Asia and tech in Asia have been focused on that scoops type angle quite aggressively over the past 6 months.
Yeah. I mean, historically, you're a history buff, but historically, the role of media was to be like a fact checker as to what's happening, right? Like, so journalists fundamentally in their blood they're kind of like auditors in my mind. Like journalists and auditors have like that similar DNA in them that like compels them to be like, is this the truth? And like, if not, I'm going to go figure out what the truth is. And so they're, professionally, they're skeptical by nature, right? Like they're trained to question what other people accept as like truth and fact. And so that doesn't go away in the AI world. I think if anything, it just gives them more time to do that as opposed to, having to work on like multiple drafts and edits and things like that. So yeah. And the other thing about the opacity is, okay, what did you think about Glasswall when it came out last year?
I think
VC review site.
The VC review site, that's a good one. It came up and then...
Were you still at Monk Hill then?
I was at Monk Hill at that point of time, yes. Yeah, I thought it was, it was something that I had thought about in the context of Brave. But then I just felt like, frankly, I was just like, I didn't feel like if I was at Monk Hill, I wasn't...
It wouldn't be great. Yeah.
It wasn't neutral.
You're not neutral, yeah, for sure.
And also, as somebody who's inside the community hosting that everyone's going to shit on me.
Yeah.
So when you did it, I was like, I'm glad you did it because I'm not interested in hosting it, but I'm interested in the existence of it because I think it's important because I've definitely seen a lot of founders who have gotten, frankly, screwed by bad VCs in Southeast Asia, right? And you hear all these stories or I see like the blowback of it, and I just felt like, I think it's a good transparency effort and window. So yeah, if you ask me, I was appreciative, I was amused, I benefited from rereading it as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you think about it, but that's what
I bring it up because on the opacity point, there are also things that actually people know in the community.
Right.
Everybody who's like been around for a while knows, but it's never written down.
Yeah.
It's just like whispered.
Yeah.
And Glasswall actually proved that, in my opinion, on a number of occasions. But like there were certain things that got written in Glasswall that you had always heard about. But if you were a new founder, you weren't really plugged into this community, right? Like if you're the Lucent's founder, like you wouldn't necessarily know these things about the VC. And so like to me, that's also asymmetry of information.
Right.
And so one thing that media will continue to play is like actually distribute the distribution of information to create like a more symmetrical and even playing field.
Right.
And Glasswall really felt like that made it really obvious to me because like, sure, I mean, lots of people complained. Lots of people loved it, but there were complaints, of course. But industry insiders generally were like, there was almost nothing on that site that surprised me.
Yeah.
Whereas like people who hadn't been around for quite as long and weren't as plugged in were like, I learned so much from that site.
Yeah.
And that's where we were like, okay, actually, we still fundamentally believe that this creates value and is good for the community to be able to level out that opacity and create a little bit more transparency.
Yeah, I totally agree about that. And I think it's interesting because from my perspective, it was like, I think another layer to that would be people in Singapore were more likely to be aware.
Yes.
But people who were in Vietnam or the Philippines that were further out from these nodes were less aware, right? And so there's an interesting geographical layer where your product was really helpful for people who are not plugged in and plugged in like they're not plugged into the Singapore ecosystem, for example, right? So I thought this is an interesting cross-country dynamic because also it was helpful for Singaporean founders to learn about other countries' VCs as well. So it went both ways, but I think it was just an interesting dynamic. Yeah.
I mean, imagine being like a first-time founder, you're, I don't know, 28 years old or whatever, and you just like, the VC was like super rude to you, and then you're just like, oh my God, I suck. Like you internalize that sort of, like there's so much ups and downs in building a startup anyways, but definitely they like a bad meeting like that can make you feel so small and like really question what you're doing. But you can go to class and be like, oh, actually this VC treats everybody like that, right? Like there's like a little bit of comfort. You're like, okay, it's not just me.
Yeah, it's not that you're terrible.
Yeah.
It's them.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. It's not right. So like, I mean, if we can bring like a little bit of emotional comfort so that people don't feel like this journey is so lonely. And then obviously fundraising, I think, is when many founders feel the most exposed. They feel like, yeah, that's like the hardest part of the job for them. And so like, if we're just trying to bring a little bit of comfort and support, knowledge and awareness.
And I think what's interesting is that, you mentioned earlier that there are some products you feel have strong product market fit, some other areas they're looking to kind of improve over time. And just kind of curious, any color on that?
So, I mean, again, subscription, like I mentioned, we're loosening our paywall. I think it's not because we lost product market fit, but we do need to adapt what media subscription looks like in the world of AI and in the world of these other macro forces. So, yeah, that one we're adjusting, tweaking, of course. I mean, honestly, our jobs board, it's like, because tech startups have mostly been laying off over these last few years versus hiring, that was something that was like doing really well for us. But, the interest in tech talent has slightly declined. I mean, of course, AI remains really high, but everything else is a fraction of what the volume used to be. And so like, we just view that as cyclical. And then, so what else? The database is actually something that we haven't had the time and attention to crack it, but I do feel like our database, we have like almost 100,000 proprietary data points about companies and information about their hiring, their funding range, and it's very specific. We can compare it on a head-to-head basis with like a Traction or a Crunchbase, and we have data in there that's not. So I feel like we haven't properly monetized it yet. That's also where Glasswall sits. And then events is just like continuously evolving business, right? Like how people connect. I mean, the thing with events is like, especially after COVID, everybody wants to do their own in-person event. And so there's a ton of competition out there. And so, that one is just like the in-person business. It is like you have to evolve and upgrade every single year. Like there is no off year for an event.
Yeah.
Every single year you need to be delivering like better speakers, better topics, better in-person experience. And so that one is not like a product market fit thing. It's just like the name of the game. You just got to keep going. It's quite a treadmill.
Yeah, I can imagine actually. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, we saw the kind of like ping pong a little bit. It was like before COVID, it was events. And then after that, COVID was like, it's all remote. And after that, it became hybrid. And now we're kind of like bifurcating again. I don't know. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what's your point of view on in-person events and community events? How do you see that happening? Yeah.
I mean, I'm an extrovert, so I will always prefer an in-person event.
I'm an exhausted extrovert.
To do this, but I hate it.
After I'm extroverted, I need to go home and take a rest.
Fair enough.
So, yeah.
I'm an extrovert. I like in-person events. I think there's a certain buzz and an energy. And like, just, I talk faster than I type, and so like, it's just easier for me to really exchange ideas and have a proper dialogue in person. It was probably been maybe almost 3 years since we hosted a webinar, but like, I don't really see people signing up for that anymore. And so I think what and some people will still come to us because of course in Southeast Asia, it's very fragmented. So some of our partners will come to us and be like, hey, can we host a webinar? Because I want to reach the entire region, but obviously I don't want to go to every single country in person. And I really get that. But, when was the last time you signed up for a webinar? Like on a personal, like, no, right? No. So people aren't doing that anymore. But in the same time, since COVID at least, like obviously TikTok's been on the rise, like social media consumption is still on the rise. And so it's also it's like, okay, if it's like logistically or operationally impossible to do a bunch of in-person events, then you do have to think about what's the best way to kind of like distribute the message in a digital way. I don't think it's a virtual event, but I do think there are other ways to get there, like through other content mechanisms.
Yeah, I think the webinar is like the least fun version of all the social versions.
Yeah.
But it is also the worst version of all the work stuff. So what I mean by that is like at the work, you have to do Zoom calls anyway. So you're already doing mini webinars all the time anyway. Yeah. So by the time you do a social event or quasi work event, you just want to go in person. I think that's a weird, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a weird, I feel like it's like a barbell kind of situation, right?
But let's talk about the barbell from your perspective, right? Does that mean that you think there's going to be some stuff that's going to be super digital and then you got to focus on the in-person events, you got to make them bigger and splashier? Is that what you mean by the barbell from your perspective?
I think so. So I think it's either like you're creating digital content, which obviously it's great because it can scale, like you can reach a lot of people all at once. But obviously there's a lot of content on the internet. So it's also really being able to cut through the noise, deliver real insights, have an audience that really cares and connects with you. Historically, I feel like that's always been more top of the funnel, but I think that's not the case anymore. People are just like completely living in that digital content world. And then the in-person events, cooler, more interesting, better value for sure. And so I think what we are also doing is, I think for a while, everyone's like, oh, well, last year we had 1,000 people. So this year we have 2,000 people. Now we have 3,000 people. But there's a limit to that. And there's a limit in terms of how big an event can be before you start to lose some of that. And so for us, it's really just right sizing the event to the goal and the objective of that particular audience, right? Like if you're telling me it's a C-level event, it's obviously going to be a lot tighter and smaller because you want those C-levels to actually have enough time to properly network versus like our Tech in Asia conference, traditionally like 5,000 people-ish. We're not going any bigger than that. It's just like, it doesn't create better networking opportunities. In fact, people will write in and be like, it was amazing. I met so many amazing people, but it was like very overwhelming trying to cram it all in within 2 days. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the barbell aspect of it.
I mean, I think that's a tricky part, right? Because, I think the barbell always feels like, to me, at least it reminds me of the entertainment world, right? It's like, the barbell is like, you have on one end, you have like Marvel.
Okay.
Like these blockbusters, like everyone must go to. If you don't go, you're a loser. Pretty much dynamic. And then after that is I don't know, I'm going to say like Netflix, it's just like a long tail, but it's just something for everybody kind of dynamic, right? Do you think that's happening in the media side as well? Or, how do you think about the barbell? Yeah.
In terms of like, are people congregating around specific topics that they're interested in? Or sorry, what do you mean?
I'm just speculating because it feels like, to me, I feel like there's this world where the concept of entertainment, news, and content is interesting where I think on one end, I think maybe the version of that is all becoming short form.
Okay.
Like one end of the barbell
Yeah,
is like, everything is in 10-second to 40-second, a recipe is in 40 seconds now, on a YouTube short, for example, right?
Yeah.
And that's news or information that's like bite-sized, right? And then there's a bunch of stuff that's super long form,
Right.
super deep and
Yeah.
pretty random actually sometimes. It's like,
Like 5-hour acquired episodes?
yeah,
You know,
exactly, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like super esoteric, super personalized, maybe
Yeah.
not idiosyncratic is probably the word, right? It's like very opinionated,
Yeah.
it's Jordan Peterson or
Yeah.
Huberman,
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about. Do you see that happening, or is it just I'm just making things out in my head? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that that is the container that the message comes through. But I think people, and you will get people who self-select based off of like, some people will just, they love a 10-second video clip versus like a really in-depth premium content piece or like a 5-hour episode. But I think that, so people will self-select based on like the format and the channel that they want to hear from. But actually I think the main thing is still that messaging. And so I guess I would separate like form from function a little bit.
Right.
Which is, I think the Hubermans or whatever, it's because they actually care about what that guy has to say. The Joe Rogans, right? Like they care about what those people have to say. And then the content itself or the channel itself and the format itself is just like it's a byproduct.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. And so to me, if we think about like, okay, Tech in Asia has a message we want to get out. I think that message, as long as we're really clear on what that message is, my goal would be to put it into as many different containers and as many different formats as possible so that that format thing doesn't become a blocker for anybody who's trying to hear the message.
I think that's really interesting, right? Because, that's really the tricky part about it. It's like, it's very different because historically, I don't know, a newspaper,
Yeah.
Straits Times would have been, I write and then somebody reads,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And now what you're saying is AI writes or something like
Yeah,
that.
right.
And then it becomes a LinkedIn article, long form video, a
Yeah.
podcast, so many different containers you could be in, right?
I mean, I guess this is how I view it, which is just like, I'm thinking about like, what am I trying to do? And I think we're trying to get ideas across, but I don't think we're trying to get 10-second videos across. Like we're not TikTokers. Like that's not, I don't define myself by the channel that I run on, but I define us by like, what we're trying to create. And which is why, actually, to your AI question earlier, I was like, our goal is to build and serve Asian tech and startup community, not to stay just a media publication. And so that gives us a little bit more mental flexibility in how we approach the problem. I think if you did say, I'm a TikToker, then okay, then you work within those constraints. You define the problem a little bit more narrowly, which means that your solution set would necessarily have to come out of that. And so, yeah, I guess it goes back to problem definition, but you can define it however you want. Huberman probably feels like this is the best way he can get out his message, or he just loves, this is how he talks and lives. And so it's the most natural form for him. But, like even these crazy long podcasts or whatever, they always have that amplification and distribution and promotional aspect to it, in which they try to force fit a little bit and then, bring people into the main meal, if you will. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I was a TikToker that does tech in Asia rather than tech in Asia that does TikTok,
Yes, exactly.
it'd be quite different, right?
Exactly.
Because one is, you're taking this content, you're putting it into TikTok that's there. I guess a TikToker who's doing tech in Asia, would they, I don't know, dance and sing about tech in Asia?
guess so.
I'm just,
So TikTok illiterate that yeah. Are you on TikTok? Do you like it?
I am in TikTok and I find that I spend,
It's good for you.
I wouldn't say it's good for me.
Yeah. Okay. But you like enjoy it as a platform.
I think that algorithm does kind of like service my 1 hour version myself.
Right.
But I do find that at the end of the day, I don't feel like I've benefited from all that time on TikTok.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's one of my struggles is I think I'm somebody who produces on TikTok for the Brave podcast and so forth. I'm someone who's a curator, so obviously I need to watch some of this stuff to kind of get a sense of what's going on in terms of taste.
Yeah.
But I really don't want to become a full-blown consumer, if that makes sense. So it's kind of an interesting piece where it's like I want to produce for it, but I don't want to consume too much of it.
Yeah.
And I think, that brings another topic is like, we're both parents, right?
Yeah.
So you have a 1 and 3 year old, I have a 4 and 2 year old. It's kind of interesting because they're generation alpha. And, I think, I don't know, maybe it was like writing a newspaper. I'll be proud to give them a newspaper.
Yeah.
You know,
Like, look what daddy did.
yeah. And then now I'm like, oh, I created all these shorts. And it's like, hey, here's TikTok.
Yeah.
I'll be like, maybe you shouldn't be watching too much TikTok as a kid, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that has been a challenge. So I'm just kind of curious, how do you feel about that? How are you raising your kids on, I don't know, screens? Or is there any kind of point of view on that, etc.? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, we don't have like a very strict and defined philosophy when it comes to screens.
Yeah.
I mean, the main thing is like when we travel, it's a free for all. Like with the 1-year-old and 3-year-old, you're like, you can do whatever you want when we're on a plane, like just stay quiet. But no, I mean, of course at home, we try to limit screen time. When we do watch screens, it tends to be, there are all these like slow animations. And so we try to pick some of those. Of course, there's like an occasional Paw Patrol in there. You can't I have 2 boys, you can't really avoid it. So we try to control screens, and especially with the 3-year-old, we're explaining it's like a limited thing. Social media at this point, I'm like kind of like a straight no. Like I don't plan on letting my kids touch social media until, I don't know, 14, 15. I don't know if I can hold to that so far in the future. I know.
They're like 14 years old and they don't have social media, Instagram.
Did you read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt?
I've read a summary of it.
Okay.
I haven't read the full book, but you should explain the thesis.
Right. So The Anxious Generation is all about Jonathan Haidt. He's a researcher and a professor, and he basically researched the effect of social media on kids. And I was actually very nervous when I first picked up the book. I'm like, oh my God, it's going to tell us how like we need to keep our kids off of all. But actually, I thought the final message was quite moderate and maybe even attainable. So his main point is like, it's not screen time that's necessarily terrible, it's social media. And the reason social media is bad is because for all the reasons we know, it creates like these false senses of like what everybody else is doing, everyone else is living their best life. And it's particularly damaging to adolescent and pre-adolescent girls. And so his point was like, okay, keep your kids off of social media for as long as possible. Screen time in moderate doses is like totally fine. And then, and then also if you're going to do screen time, try to make it a little bit more interactive so that it's not just like straight screen content consumption. And I was like, okay, that seems okay, right? And so that's kind of where we're at, which is we do screen time in limited amounts. Like my kids are too young to even think about social media, so I think that's a good thing, and that's the goal to keep it. And but then I think like with ChatGPT, with some of the voice functions that are coming into the LLMs, I'm like, okay, maybe this is a good way to do like more conversational Chinese to teach my kid Chinese. And like, so we haven't started doing that yet, but that's something. All tech should be a tool, right? And so if it serves a purpose that you're trying to create anyways, and I think that's a good thing. ChatGPT can be a Chinese tutor instead of paying an actual person. I'm like, okay, maybe it's not terrible because on access, on demand, whatever, easy access. Yeah, I don't have like a very deep philosophy on it, but we're just trying our best, right?
I mean, I'm there in the same boat. I think the research is kind of still early as well. I think, we literally only just invented technology for our kids to grow up in.
Yes.
So our kids are the guinea pigs. I think maybe on my side, I probably lean a little bit more on the, I would say conservative end. I mean, like I said, flights and they got to use them,
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Whatever, like, here's your headphones.
Yeah. So I'm in that camp as well. It's just that I think for me, I think I have 2 young girls, and so I'm just kind of curious in my head.
I do need to be more careful.
Yeah. So inside my head, I'm just like, it's not that I'm against technology. It's just that I don't know what it'll do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I mean, they use so much technology in their life anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
they're being driven around in cars,
Yeah,
they go
yeah,
to school, they go to the museum. So I think there's so much technology around them anyway. So what's the point of adding this extra layer of uncertainty?
Yeah.
And it's not as if they're not going to catch up on all the
Yes,
technology.
totally.
One wants to become teenagers and
Totally.
hate dad. Like,
I know.
oh, my dad's so cool. He's on Instagram.
Yeah,
Oh.
I know. Well, so then the book specifically talks about like, okay, so it's particularly damaging to girls because, there's chemical changes that are happening around adolescence. So like if you can avoid social media accounts for them until they're 15, some of their brains are a lot better formed at that point, and so it becomes a lot less damaging.
Right.
And I think like regulation is so tricky because when this technology first, it's not very old technology, right? When technology first came out, everyone's like, you don't know any better, so my kids are the guinea pigs. But now you kind of know, and so you can fight back against it. Like you can put up guardrails, and it's like there are groups of parents who are like, okay, if the friend group, no one in the friend group has Instagram or TikTok, it's a lot less weird if you don't have it. And so you have to like find these pockets of like-minded people, fellow Luddites, if you will, be like, okay, we are going to be the Luddites here, and we will not allow our children to be shamed by this. Yeah.
And it's interesting because we are in tech.
Yes.
We are creating content into social media. And we are parents, and we don't want our kids to take too much of it.
I just view our tech as like, B2B tech.
I mean, of course, at some level, we're B2B. We're working on focusing on professionals.
It's true. Exactly.
We're not marketing to kids,
Exactly. So,
But it's interesting to see that dynamic where it's like, I think a lot of tech professionals feel conflicted because of that, right? Because there's so many my friends who are parents and they're working in Facebook, Google, or, it's just like part of this entire tech industry. And it's kind of like, wow, we love technology in our work and we use it every day in our lives. It's magic and it's going to transform the world. And we don't know how to introduce it to our kids in a way that makes sense. How do we titrate that dose in a way that makes sense for them? Right?
I know. But I mean, in my view, there's different categories of tech, right? There's clearly productive technology. So like when it comes to AI, I don't really stress as much. I think I could see myself when my kids reach like 6, 7, 8, using AI to teach them AI so that they're going to be in an AI world anyway. So that's almost something that wouldn't be a terrible thing for them to learn early on. That's a productive technology versus social media, which I don't think is truly that productive. It's kind of like a fun, useless technology. And it's like, okay, so you don't need that. So you also have to distinguish between what you're learning and what you're not learning. Actually, I will say sometimes we open up the old school MS Paint. There are certain websites that have recreated the MS Paint. And sometimes we do let our 3-year-old paint around on laptop because he's just learning how to move a mouse. And that doesn't feel like it's that damaging. I wouldn't call it productive tech, but it's like, okay, versus things that I think are a little bit more destructive. And so it's not all tech, right? It's just, you have to be able to pick and choose what you think will actually serve the kid. And I mean, I don't have like an Apple Vision Pro, but that's probably not something I would give to my kid right now.
Oh yeah, it's like instead of daycare, it's like, here's an Apple Vision Pro.
Exactly. Like, that's probably me. Learning how to ask good prompts, like I feel like that could only serve them well when they're 25 or 30 or, because that's going to be important.
Yeah. On that note, to wrap things up, any advice you would give to, other tech parents out there?
I think technology is agnostic, right? It's really how you use technology.
Right.
And I've been getting more into the climate tech space specifically. And I think it's super interesting because like on the one hand, technology is one of the things that have gotten us into the climate crisis I think we're now in. And then honestly, AI and the use of data centers and the water and the power usage and energy usage is not great. But at the same time, it's like, okay, then the way we kind of innovate our way out of this is also through technology. And so, technology is what it is. It's just a tool. It's really all about how you use it, how you want to apply it in your life. And it's all about you making sure that you're using the tool as opposed to the technology using you. And I think that's probably where, if you think about Facebook's growth model, which was like utilizing the user data without them even really knowing and then being able to build their marketing machines off of that, I'm like, that is an instance where I think technology used us unwittingly. And so I just, do your due diligence, set your own ground rules, and just remember to make sure that you stay in control of the technology.
Awesome. Well, I think that's really good advice. On that note, thank you so much for coming and sharing your point of view.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun.
It was
I like it in person for an exhausted extrovert.
I know. Okay, great.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.